Do we have? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I apologize for the delay. We're going to start with the State Board of Elections. Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pull up my screen. It's my pleasure to present the State Board of Elections Fiscal 2023 Budget Analysis. Looking at this first graph here, the budget decrease is almost $2 million, and there's a couple things going on here. First, there's fluctuations between the budget for the primary election, which is funded in fiscal 2022, and then the general election, which is funded in fiscal 2023. There's also a mandated general fund appropriation to the Fair Campaign Finance Fund in fiscal 2023, and a couple of IT changes, which I will discuss later in the presentation. So starting with the fiscal 2022 budget discussion and looking at the deficiencies, there's a couple notable deficiencies associated with the primary election. And during the fiscal 2022 budget formulation, primary election costs were particularly difficult to anticipate because the future trajectory of the pandemic and any public health considerations that would need to be made during administering the primary election was kind of unclear at that time. There's also some fluctuations associated with the implementation of Chapters 56 and 514 of 2021, which require that ballot applications be sent in the primary election, as well as text and email message delivery for permanent absentee voters. Then there are some one-time costs in fiscal 2022 associated with the legal settlement with the National Federation of the Blind, as well as there $5 million in fiscal 2022 for poll book licenses and printer replacement. This $5 million is about $1 million more than a contract that was approved for this purpose by BPW, but the additional $1 million is to reimburse local boards that have already started to replace their poll book printers. Another notable thing going on in fiscal 2022 is the conclusion of the agency election management system, which looks like it's going to have about $100,000 in funding, more than it plans to expend. So those additional general funds will be kept in the due its major IT fund. So moving to the fiscal 2023 budget discussion, a little more than a third of the budget supports general election costs, and the next largest chunk is for various IT expenditures. Exhibit 4 shows the breakdown of the various general election costs, with the largest slice being for ballots and ballot printing, followed by temporary staffing needs. Exhibit 5 shows the fluctuations between fiscal 2022 and 2023. So there's some notable increases associated with administering the general election in fiscal 2023. You can see there's over $800,000 added for ballot printing and over $700,000 added for call center expenditures to align with the fiscal 21. The largest decrease is associated at the bottom of page 9, associated with sending those ballot applications to every voter in the primary election. Now going on to page 10, there is about a $3 million increase associated with the poll book major IT project, which I'll discuss later in this
Grace,
presentation.
could you go back to that a second? What was that? That was kind of quick. One-time expenditures related to mailed ballot applications. $2.7 million reduction.
Correct. So those will be sent to voters in the primary election, which is in fiscal 2022. But they will not be sent in the general election in fiscal 23. So there's a reduction.
Because they don't need to be?
It was required by chapters 56 and 514 of the 2021 session to be sent in the primary election.
Okay. So this is just a reduction from last year. This is a change from last year.
Correct. Yep. This
Okay.
is a change from
Okay.
fiscal 22 to 23.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Then, besides the poll book project, other IT fluctuations, there's a net decrease of $4.3 million associated with that poll book printer replacement that's going on in fiscal 2022. And then, as far as other notable changes, there is a $4 million general fund increase associated with that mandated appropriation to the Fair Campaign Finance Fund. Now, looking at personnel.
What's the balance in that fund?
I'd have to get back to you. I don't have the number offhand.
Okay.
Moving to personnel, the number of positions remains level from fiscal 2022. There is a deficiency to bring a 0.8 of a position up to full-time, which is a full 1.0 position. And then there is one long-term vacancy in the State Board of Elections, which DLS is asking the agency to comment how the duties of that position are being carried out since the position has been vacant since December 2019. Looking at issues, DLS only has one to discuss about the poll book major IT project. So this project was first planned to be implemented in time for the 2022 elections, but the poll book project evaluation committee has determined that it should be implemented for first use in the 2024 elections. So there's been a number of things that have kind of elongated the timeline and elongated the procurement process, and one of which is there was more customization that was expected to be needed to make the poll book system that was chosen compatible with Maryland's election processes. So that took a little longer in procurement, and additional time was offered to vendors to submit their bids after revisions were made to the RFP. So the current implementation timeline now projects that there will be about 9 months from when the new system is going to be completed to when it will be first used in the presidential primary election in 2024. And then looking at the cost estimates, DLS has received a number of cost estimates for this project, but among the estimates, it seems the project will likely exceed 24 million, but total less than 26 million at completion. And one notable thing here is that a contract for the poll book project was awarded in February, and that contract, as proposed before BPW, estimates an equal cost share between the local boards of elections and the state. However, as anticipated in the governor's budget books, the fund split looks like it's going to be 34% general funds and then a 66% local share for that total project cost. So this doesn't align with the contract that BPW approved, even though in fiscal 2023, the costs in that year are an equal share between the state and local boards of elections. So there's a little bit of uncertainty with how that cost share will shake out. So DLS is recommending to request quarterly reports on this project's spending as well as its development activities as it prepares to be ready for the 2024 elections. And then the final thing in this analysis is an update on redistricting, and mainly just notes that the legal challenges to the maps could present implementation risks to the implementation timeline. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Eckert.
Thank you very much for your analysis. I do have a question about the local cost sharing.
Yes.
Do you have any kind of an estimate on what that is? Because that's essentially an unfunded mandate to the locals. Isn't that correct?
Well, they're anticipating to put some money for the project. It's just a question of, in the out years, how much of a share they will provide. But the contract, as approved by BPW, requires an equal cost share. So that'll be about like 12.5 million distributed amongst all the local boards of elections. But there's a different cost estimate published in the governor's budget books. So basically, in the out years is the question of what the cost share is going to be. But the administrator also might be able to expand.
Okay, well, I'll ask that then. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms.
On the, on your exhibit number 4, what's the 1.4 million, remind me on, what is that call center?
I believe that's if like voters have questions, they could call into the call center, but again, the administrator might be able to better answer.
Okay. And yet, I have the same question about voter communication. I guess it's, I could ask them.
They'd probably have a better answer, yes.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions? Thank you, Grace. Great job. Ms. Lamone?
Good afternoon, everyone. Linda Lamone, Administrator of Elections. I have Nikki Charleston here, who is my deputy, and Shelley Holland, who is my fiscal officer for the agency. Glad to be back before the committee. I haven't seen everybody in a long time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for taking us. And thank you for the opportunity to sort of tell you where we are getting ready for your election, coming up quicker than I would like, but I'm sure not quick enough for you guys. I want to thank Ms. Peterson for an excellent analysis of the budget and what's going on at the agency. She was very thorough and very on point with everything that she did in her written analysis. And that especially applies to the poll book implementation decision to postpone the implementation. It was a unanimous decision among the people involved, and their recommendation to me. And of course, it reduces the risk for the 2022 election because of everything else that the local boards are involved with, the redistricting and so forth. And it gives us time to, as Grace said, customize the software for Maryland's particular election structure and test and have a statewide mock election. So. And secondly, she accurately describes the challenges that we're facing with redistricting in Maryland, with all the time delays with the court cases and the anxiety that I can tell you that your local boards of elections are feeling right now. And I think my staff shares that anxiety with them. There were only 2 things that she asked me to respond to, and I'd be happy to do that. One concerns a vacancy in the office. We submitted the request to reclassify the position in June of 2021, got the approval to do that in December, and immediately started the recruitment. We have interviewed 2 candidates, and we have 2 more to go. So the work is being performed by a contractor and shared with other staff that position was doing, but we'll catch up. And then lastly, DLS recommended the continuing reporting of the status of the poll book implementation. And of course, we are happy, more than happy to do that. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator King.
Yes, Ms. Lamone, nice to see you. I do have a question. I know for myself, I've already registered to have the ballot mailed to me. And my question is, has the volume of people that are requesting mail-in ballots and people that are looking to vote early, does that lower the number of polling places that you need to have? And is there an easier way to do it to lessen the stress on the staff by having less polling places?
The answer to the first question, I think obviously yes. We're going to have a lot of people take advantage of that. And the second answer to your second question is definitely. The local boards of elections are very anxious about this, and one of the things that their state association, Mayo, Maryland Election Officials Association, is recommending that they be allowed to use vote centers in anticipation of the reduced amount of work it would take them to get ready for the election, and, because they don't know where to put the precincts now, because they don't know what plan is going to be in effect. So they can't start going out and contracting for those locations. On the other hand, they do have their early voting sites pretty well pegged down, and they could expand on those with the vote center concept. That's their theory, and that's what they're asking. I don't know what's going to happen to that request.
Senator Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turn me off. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. Lamone. Just a quick question. During the last election, I really appreciated having this big white box at the Board of Elections where I could just take my ballot. I didn't have to stand in line. I almost could do it from my car, but I actually had to get out. Is that anticipated in this election? And with the document that came to my home that I filled out requesting the, I guess I'm requesting the vote by mail ballot, will I be able to combine those two things?
Absolutely, yeah. The drop-off boxes are really, really popular, and I think the interesting thing is most every article on elections during the 2020 election, whether it be print or whatever, had a picture of the drop box. And the voters loved them. So we have more. There'll be more out,
And
more
so
available.
that's not further complicated by the vote center
No.
concept? Those are two separate
Right. The
concepts.
drop-off box locations are very carefully scrutinized by both the local boards and my staff to make sure that they're in convenient, popular places.
Excellent, and that'll be primary and general?
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Very good. Thank you, Mr.
Absolutely. You're
Chairman.
welcome.
Thank you.
Senator Alfred?
Pardon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lemon, good to see you.
Hi.
Just to echo Senator Griffith's comments, I love the drop box so much, I actually dressed up as one for Halloween in 2020. Two questions, one related to drop boxes and then another to the poll books. Will we have, and thank you for working so closely with the AELR committee on those kind of rapid change of regulations during the 2020 election where the drop boxes came into play. Will we have enough drop boxes to have a drop box at every polling location?
No.
Okay, how will we determine where there will not be a drop box?
The law that you all passed last year sets out, I think, 6 factors that we have to take into consideration when locating both the early voting centers and the drop-off boxes. And we have been very carefully considering those factors in locating the drop-off boxes. Are they served by public transportation? What are some of the others? Population density, voter turnout, historically disenfranchised communities, and then there's one other, I can't remember what it is. So the other factor we have to take into consideration is the ability of the local board to monitor those boxes and to service them. By that I mean going and collecting the ballots, and because we're requiring teams of 2 to do that. And so you go down to Somerset County and their staff is so limited, you can't have too many boxes because they'd never be able to get around to all of them. So we take all that into consideration, and I believe this week, supposed to be reviewing the last of the drop-off box locations to approve them.
Okay, we're just all gonna have to be, and obviously it's our job to help you communicate the difference between a polling location and a drop box location and all that, okay?
Right.
On the poll books, and thank you for you and your staff being very helpful with the city of Annapolis's municipal election in 2021. Is the poll book issue raised by the analyst the same poll book that was utilized in 2021, or this is a revamp of that?
It's a whole new poll book.
Okay, okay, gotcha.
Brand new, right off the lot.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Senator Corrigan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. Quick question, when you talk about the stresses and the anxieties with redistricting, and obviously that's a looming, conversation I'm sure you guys have every day. At a certain point, what is the date, I guess, the following deadline's been moved back to March 22nd right now. The primary set in June. At what point, though, is basically the drop dead date where you would have to consider, I know it's not your decision, but will you be able to still have the election as it's currently, set in June? I mean, there's gotta
Well,
be a certain,
I'm doing everything in my power to not have to move that date, but it's
Sure.
up to the courts. The problem is according to, we have so many lawsuits filed, it's just
right, there's
unbelievable.
time as far as when you have to get absentees out, the mail-in, the early voting, there's gotta be a date that you have circled, like, all right, if we don't know by this date, we can't do
What
it.
is the
I mean,
move
there has to be, I'm sure you guys have figured that out.
Yeah, Senator, the real date for us is the date set by federal law to get our ballots out to the military and overseas voters, and that's May the 14th.
May the 14th.
If we don't have the ballots ready to rock and roll by then, we're in deep trouble.
How long does it take you to manufacture the ballots, or, like, once you know what the districts are, to be able to make that 14th mail-out date?
Yeah, do 4 weeks,
So you go 4 weeks back from May 14th, now you're talking,
and then we have to build the ballots.
okay. Thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's gonna be tough.
Yeah, sounds like it, thank you.
Senator Solly, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, it's good to see you, and thank you so much for the information. We see that there were a record amount of early voting this past year. Do you see if you would have to make maybe some adjustments on that because how many you had in by places or polls? Do you think you would have to do something like that? Because again, the record amount and all the people that came, it really made a great statement, so, which is a good thing.
I'm not sure I understand your question,
Well,
Senator.
we have a record amount of people that early voted.
You mean vote by mail early or go to
Just
the
the
early
early
vote?
vote altogether?
Both,
And
okay.
they, in person with the early vote? Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, I know that there were just so many locations. So are we possibly looking to maybe more locations because of that or not?
I think we're looking at less. Oh, Nikki's reminding me that you all increased the number of early voting centers in some of the, for all the counties, I guess. They could all have additional ones, and some must have additional ones.
Because by number, yes, okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Rosebeth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the drop boxes. My experience in 2020 was everybody loved them. I agree with all that. But particularly loved them, I kept hearing because they didn't trust the post office. And I want to just get you to respond to the general concerns that voters have about the post office and how you're addressing that and how we should address it. Not that the post office is going to steal the votes, but they're not going to deliver it for, years. So I'd be interested in how you're thinking about the post office problem.
Yeah, years. I belong to an association, the National Association of State Election Directors, and there's a National Association of Secretaries of State. And we have been having constant dialogue with the post office people for various things, but especially with the delivery. And they're just cautioning us that the delivery time is longer now than it used to be. Instead of 2 days, well, I'm not sure what it is, like 4 days now for first-class mail. And we also, typically before an election, are in touch with the regional managers for Maryland. There are two, the southern and the northern, to make sure everybody's in step with the national guidelines. And some of the things they do is the U.S. Postal Service management requires the local post office people to sort of sweep the building every day at the end of the day to make sure there are no ballots. And that they have been stressing that they're going to make sure that's done, that kind of thing. So they don't really listen to me, but
No, I take your point. No, it's great, it's great what you're doing. I guess, is there any guidance that you're going to put out or have put out to the public about it as to how to manage, sort of like the CDC does on COVID, here's the way to manage the risk?
well, one of the problems, and I'm going to get in trouble here, I think, but I don't have any money in the budget for voter education for the general election. Zero. And we asked for it, and we didn't get it. And we had over $2 million for the 2020 election for the general election to educate our voters on various things just like that. We have zero this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, just a second, because I want to follow up on that. Because it was one of the questions that I had from the chart in Exhibit 4. What's the, you have that available to you?
Yeah. Yep, got it.
So what is that 1.4 million for call center?
Every election, I think going back probably 3 or 4 election cycles, we have had a call center available to take calls, not only that would come into my office, but the major, larger jurisdictions. And that is intended to free up staff from having to answer routine calls. How do I get an absentee ballot? How do I check my voter registration?
So it's for the whole, it's for the period of the election, it's not
Correct.
just.
They're in operation already now because of the mailings that went out with the
Right,
permanent mail-in ballot.
okay. And what's the 600,000 for voter communication, which was kind of where, and to hear what you said a minute ago was kind of where I was going. Is that part of providing?
That's the Twilio.
I'm waiting for the answer over here.
It's, Twilio, I know that.
So it's not the voter education that the administrator was talking about. We think it was to do with starting to text and email messages to
Oh,
voters.
right, yep.
I'm not sure if Grace can itemize what she added up to get you that, but it's not a formal statewide voter education campaign for the general election.
Yeah, you all have required us to build a system so that we can communicate with our voters on various issues via phone, mail, or texting. And part of this is developing that whole texting service for the voters.
So it's really kind of an extension almost of that call center
It
stuff.
is. It's a-
Okay,
yes.
okay, got it. All right, so then to the point of voter education, what did you request?
How much did we request? 500,000.
500,000, just for the general election?
Correct. But that is not enough. We should have asked for more.
And what do you have for, so from last year's budget then, because of the primary, is paying for the primary, right?
Yes, we have money for the primary,
And how much was that?
500,000.
That was 500,000. And you requested another 500,000 and not in there. What would you have used that for exactly?
We have a contract with KO, Public what? KO Public Affairs, what the Board of Public Works approved in February, right? January, whatever. And we used that same group for the 2020 election. And they reached out to various communities, minority communities, communities that were typically didn't have high voter turnout, to try to educate them on how to participate in the election. And it was a rather, I thought, a really good campaign. They subcontracted with an Hispanic company.
It also included statewide media buys, a lot of online presence on Google and Yahoo, and it was just a traditional multimedia statewide education campaign to tell people how to vote in the election that looks so different than what we were used to, so.
And what was the budget for that one? Primary and general?
Oh, well, the general was 2.7 million. I don't recall, the primary was maybe about $1 million.
Yeah, that was all deficiency money, because we had the way the election was going to be conducted kept changing. And we kept having to reach out to the voters. And I must say, this company was fabulous in responding to the needs to get the messages out.
Right. Well, I mean, you couldn't have possibly known sort of the confusion that we've got now with the redistricting and such, and
Yeah, it's
it's a different kind of an issue, but it also may require some public awareness, I would think, too. I mean, that,
Yeah, I agree, yeah. It just depends on what plan the Court of Appeals adopts and
Right.
where the lines are. I mean,
right, but you
a lot of you probably don't know what district you might be in.
all of us. So what we don't, so you have so at this point, you have $500,000 For the primary, nothing for the general.
Correct.
Okay. Senator McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Madam Administrator, thank you for your leadership. One of the things that I know that happened in the last election cycle was I was concerned in reference to the geographic boundaries of where we place drop boxes, just making
Right.
sure from an equity standpoint. And you were able to deal with that issue by making sure that we could get a drop box in that location. But one of the challenges was that there was a shortage of drop boxes because all across the country, everybody was doing how they were having their elections. Just wanted to get a temperature to understand, like, is there still a shortage in drop boxes? Do you envision one? Is that problem existent in 2022, or no, that was a 2020 problem? And also, just in reference to the list that you said that you're about to approve about where the drop boxes are, if you can get them, I guess, to the committee staff or to the chair and just be disseminated to the senators, because I just want to make sure I don't have the geographic equity challenge that I did last year.
No, I don't think you have to worry about that, Senator, but I'll be happy to get that to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you again.
You're welcome, and we have lots of drop boxes.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Administrator, great to see you again.
Thank you.
And your team. In the 2018 election, there were some challenges. You mentioned earlier about the number of ballots. So we had some challenges in at least one of my represent multiple counties where I think the anticipation maybe was that folks were exercising their the ability to mail-in vote, and then they sort of ran out of ballots. I'm not sure if that's in your bailiwick, or do we need to go back to the counties to address that issue? We tried to address it after the last election. So what would happen is at the end of the evening, when the polls closed, we had folks in line. Thank goodness they stayed in line for a couple of hours while ballots were being delivered in anticipation of, because of the drop boxes and the mail-in voting. So if you could address that, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, happy to do so. I think you're referring to, right, so the particular county ran out of ballots at some locations. And so since then, we work with them to make sure that we're ordering enough, right? That's the first step of the process, is making sure we order enough ballots. And then work with the local boards to make sure that they're adequately deploying the right number of ballots. And so we will continue to do that work with the local boards and make sure. And then also, during early voting, we have a great ability to monitor turnout in real time. We have less of that ability on election day, but as we move to a new poll book solution, that will help us have greater insight as to what's happening, so we can know by noon that they're running through ballots more quickly, rather than waiting until rush hour and it was raining, is my recollection. It was sort of-
Rush hour in the rain, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was,
Yes.
yeah, it was bad. So.
It was quite a long night.
It was
Yeah.
a long night. So I hear you, and we will continue to work to make sure they have enough ballots ordered and that they're deploying them based on what we see. And of course, the number of people voting by mail-in ballots is going to impact how many people are eligible to vote in person. And so those are all the calculations that we take into effect as we help the locals make that, the packing.
Yeah, and we've already ordered all the papers, so we have millions of sheets of paper ready
We
to be
appreciate-
printed.
We do appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Lamone, good to see you. I'm just asking this so I know what to tell people when they ask me this question back home. A lot of them listen to the radio, particularly election night. And I've had conflicting yeses and nos over the past couple of elections. They get done with the local positions. They'd like to put it out what it is, but we're told they couldn't until the statewide numbers came in. One time they were told that. The other time they were told, well, yeah, just a local you can put out, tell what the numbers are there, but you can't say anything about the statewide races. So what is it, may I ask?
Local results, right? Yeah, no, they can put out the local results. It's the statewide races that or perhaps the congressional races that we would hold if there was, the polls stayed open late.
So local commissioner race, the Board of Ed, they can tell the
Sure.
numbers and say who
Yep.
won, who didn't win,
Yep.
and don't have to wait for the rest of it?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate
welcome.
that.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, payments to civil divisions, Ms. Kramer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting the analysis for payments to civil divisions of the state. This portion of the budget is comprised of 3 items: disparity grants to low-wealth jurisdictions based on a formula that is set in statute, grants to mitigate the impact of the local assumption of a portion of state retirement, of teacher retirement costs. Those amounts are set in statute, and there's a small portion of gaming grants to Calvert County. As you can see here in the first exhibit on page 1, the budget decreases by $12 million in fiscal 2023 compared to the prior year. Exhibit 1 shows all the allocations by county and type of grant in the fiscal 2023 allowance. This first column is the disparity grant. The second column is the teacher retirement grants, and then the Calvert County grants. Exhibit 2 shows the comparison of fiscal 2023 to fiscal 2022 by county. As you can see, Baltimore City's disparity grant declined by $11.3 million. That's due to a combination of a stable total income in the city and a declining population that leads to a lower per capita grant amount based on the formula. Washington County declined by $4.5 million due to changing their income tax rate from 3.2 to 3%, making the amount the county is eligible to receive smaller based on the formula. Those changes are offset by a $7.4 million increase in Prince George's County, and that's due to population growing at a faster rate than total income. Exhibit 3 shows all the variables that go into the calculation. If there are any questions, I can explain in more detail here, but otherwise, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance.
Questions for the committee? Senator Eckert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your analysis. Could you just go over the review, because I've had concerns from several counties, particularly Dorchester, Carolina, and Wycomico. Can you explain again why their disparity amount decreased?
So in the case of those counties, it's dependent on the county income tax revenues, as well as the county population, and how that interacts with the sort of median income tax per capita across the state. So it's all formula driven, and if they have had no changes in their income tax rate, it's purely demographic driven.
Okay, I'd just gotten a call that they were expecting something other than what they just received information on. So maybe we can, I'll talk with the folks offline. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anything else? Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary? I see your written testimony. Brilliant.
I have to agree with you there, Mr. Chairman. In fact, these comments are longer than the written testimony. I will certainly make it brief. But good afternoon, Chairman Gazzoni and committee members. For the record, I'm David Brinkley, the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management. I want to thank Jason for his analysis and his thorough report. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here to take any questions that you might have. It's the shortest testimony I have. We appreciate their recommendations to concur with the governor's allowance, so we're prepared to take any questions if you have that.
Your oral testimony was just as brilliant.
And I even shortened this.
How do you think for the secretary? Thank you. Move on to your budget, actually. And Senator Rosapep's going to take over for a few minutes.
There we go. Is this on? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today I'll be going over the budget analysis for the Office of the Secretary for the Department of Budget and Management. The Office of the Secretary receives a $38 million 2023 budget allowance, which is a $2.2 million increase over fiscal 2022. The main issues we'll be going over today are a new audit compliance unit that aims to lower the amount of repeat audit findings and increase compliance among executive agencies. Additionally, there is CCU collections are down due to the pandemic, but we are expecting those collections to go back up in the current year. There's also a summary of recommended actions that I'll be going a little bit more into at the end of the presentation. Many of these are annual budget bill recommendations that DLS recommends to increase the efficiency of the process. Exhibit 1 shows CCU collections. The central collection unit is assigned debt to collect based on people who have debts to owe to the state among many different reasons. In 2021, the cases that were assigned to CCU were fewer than in previous years because collections were paused between March of 2020 and October of 2020. The involuntary seizures that CCU needs to get all of their collections were also not in effect until February of 2021. So in 2021, we see the first year that expenses were higher than collection fees. Exhibit 2 shows that net profit. And as you can see, 2018 was the closest year to having a net loss, but in 2021, there was over $2 million in a net loss related to fewer payments assigned to collection. They did collect a higher share of the debts that they were assigned in 2021, but as I mentioned, because it was paused for a large portion of that fiscal year, they simply did not collect those payments. But we are expecting in 2022 for these to be back to normal. There's also been some changes in the Easy Pass toll violation debt assignments, but as those resume, there'll be another backlog of debts CCU will receive and drop the share of collections recovered, but increase the overall amount. Moving on to the budget analysis. This Exhibit 3 shows the components of the agency. Central Collection Unit is the largest component, and this is the special funded agency, funded solely by its own collections. The Office of Budget Analysis is the largest other share of the Office of the Secretary, receiving $10 million, while Executive Direction receives $4 million in fiscal 2023, and Capital Budgeting and Finance and Administration are rounding out the department's units. Agency spending goes 50% goes towards personnel, as well as IT support and systems maintenance expenses, making up 17% of their overall budget. The budget change this year is $2.2 million, as I mentioned at the outset, and $473,000 of that is due to turnover adjustments, allowing them to hire more positions in fiscal 2023. There's also 2 new positions for the audit compliance unit. I'll go into a little bit more detail in just a second. That receives $136,000, as well as 1.5 new contractual positions receiving $194,000. There's also new software to allow them to better manage and track the state vehicle fleet of $700,000, as well as some changes to IT and other statewide fees that added $336,000 to the budget, while administrative hearing fees decreased, and there was a one-time adjustment to the state retirement fee to shore up that budget. As I mentioned, most of these changes occur in IT and fees. However, there is also $200,000 for Central Collection Unit employee bonuses. The only personnel changes are related to the new audit unit, and so I'll jump right into that issue. So DBM is realigning some resources from within the agency in fiscal 2022 and adding some new positions in fiscal 2023 to create a new audit and executive management unit. It will have the responsibilities of enhancing audit compliance, developing a training program for budget officers and chief financial officers, as well as providing technical assistance for agencies facing fiscal and other crises. Exhibit 6 shows the repeat audit findings that the Office of Legislative Audits has found since 2008. And while there was a large improvement until 2013, the number of repeat audit findings has steadily been increasing year after year. And in 2021, 29% of audit findings were repeated from the previous audit. Most of the areas that lack compliance are in program compliance, as well as information systems, maintaining proper controls for those, as well as procurements and disbursements. There has been also some issues with other accounting-related areas such as cash receipts, payroll, federal funds, and accounts receivable. But the main issues are in complying with procedures related to programs and systems. This will be one of the targeted areas for the new compliance unit to help shore up the agency's program compliance, as well as providing some additional budget training for them. Related to the budget training, there has been some issues with the budget amendment process. DLS has noted in recent years, budget amendments have been coming in later than they were in previous years. From fiscal 2018 to 2019, 39% of budget amendments were submitted after the fiscal year end. Last year, that was 55%. This year, it did go back down to 38%, but more budget amendments were submitted in excess of 3 months after the fiscal year end. 3 times as many, in fact, in 2021 compared to 2018 and 2019. So there's still an issue in getting those budget amendments on time, allowing for adequate oversight and transparency. The technical assistance that they're going to be providing will be coming from a small team of 10 positions, one administrative officer, 2 internal auditors, 2 program analysts, 2 senior program analysts, and 3 program managers. Now, this program is responsive to issues that we've been seeing, and this should provide some enhancements to the overall compliance that we're seeing in executive agencies. However, there isn't that much information on this, so we're asking DBM to provide more detail on how the new unit will differ from previous audit compliance units, as well as their plans to staff and operate the unit, and any ongoing projects they might have. I have an update also on electric and hybrid vehicles that were purchased for the state fleet. Exhibit 8 shows the existing state vehicle fleet as of November 2021. Gasoline vehicles and flex fuel vehicles make up the vast majority of vehicles in the state fleet, while only a small sliver are for more green options. And Exhibit 9 shows the fiscal 2021 vehicle purchases as reported by DBM. Half of those are still gasoline vehicles. However, we see a much larger proportion of green vehicles being purchased, specifically hybrids and electric vehicles. DBM has the goal of purchasing 25% electric vehicles, but they're not going to meet that in 2021. However, their planned purchases for 2022 would bring the overall proportion above that threshold. There is another summary about the report they submitted regarding these vehicle fleets, and there are 2 appendices in the end regarding fiscal information. The recommended actions are summarized at the top of the analysis. I don't want to spend too much time describing each individual one. However, I'll point out recommended action number 2 would restrict $250,000 to receive semi-annual reports on ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act, to increase oversight over the federal fund usage. There is also a request to include the blueprint fund in the forecasts that DBM is providing, as well as other sections that would define the uses of the budget as well as reporting requirements for DBM. With that, I don't have anything else to report on, so I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from members of the committee? Going once, going twice. Senator Elfreth. Senator Elfreth? Oh. That was never mind, or you're going to go ahead and speak? Whatever you would like. Now Senator Jackson is blinking.
That was me, just testing.
Now Senator McCray.
Our touch screen has stopped working.
Excellent.
You're going to pass, Senator Elfreth? And Senator Jackson? I know, I'm kidding you. Okay, I think there are no questions for right now. So thank you very much. So, Mr. Secretary? You may be able to get away with no questions either, who knows?
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be back here in front of you. And so for the record, I'm David Brinkley. I hope you weren't experiencing a Russian hack there. I don't know, what's going on with the equipment. I'm David Brinkley, the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management, and with me at the table is Deputy Secretary Mark Nicole. Should the need arise, I have Joan Peacock, the Director of the Audit and Finance Compliant Unit, Tony Fugit, the Director of the Central Collections Unit, and Jesse Lawyer, his deputy, is with him, and Joe Consoli, the Administrator of the Fleet and Travel Services Unit, in the room to address any specific questions that you may have regarding those divisions. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you and the members today regarding DLS's analysis of the Secretary's office. An additional thank you goes to Jacob for the work on this analysis. We do not agree on all the recommendations, but we can always appreciate the effort that it takes to draft a very thorough analysis, and I do say, again, thanks to Jacob. You have my written testimony, so I will touch on just a few of the key points before you. To start, I want to provide a brief overview of the expanded Audit and Financial Compliance Unit, as there was some interest noted in the analysis. Originally, this unit was organized to focus primarily on providing guidance, consultative support, and technical advice to agencies related to OLA audit issues, but it has since been able to extend its capabilities with the addition of more personnel. With the inclusion of more audit compliance analysts, the office is now able to assist an increased number of agencies in their efforts to primarily reduce and ultimately completely avoid any audit findings. With the addition of the new financial compliance analysts who have financial expertise and state accounting experience, the unit is now able to provide technical assistance, guidance, and training to address those financial and accounting offices within state agencies. With that, let me get into certain recommendations. Overall, DBM concurs with 9 of the 12 recommendations that you have in front of you. In regards to recommendation number 2, the department disagrees with the restriction of funding pending a report on the expenditure of Federal American Rescue Plan Act funds. We agree with providing the requested reports. The agency respectfully requests the committee reject the restriction of funding, as the department has repeatedly proven to be compliant with previous reporting requirements regarding the ARP and keeping the legislature up to date, especially when it comes to the information and data surrounding the federal reporting. Therefore, the restriction of funds is entirely unnecessary. With respect to recommendations 3 and 4, DBM does not concur. One recommendation places limits on placing appropriations into contingency reserve, and the other disallows transfers from restricted objects of expenditure to other purposes. Neither of these were imposed on the previous administrations, and both interfere with the Secretary's ability to manage the budget. Our department sincerely believes that the current and future administrations should be afforded the same flexibility to manage funds as the previous administration. Therefore, DBM respectfully requests the committee reject the analyst's recommendations and allow this and future secretaries to retain these management tools. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to end my testimony today by acknowledging that we concur with recommendation number 1, the new recommendation number 5, which requires budget books to include a long-term forecast for the blueprint for Maryland's future fund, and recommendations 6 through 12, which we've all seen before. In closing, I thank you again for your time and consideration today, and my team and I are available to address any concerns or questions that you might have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perfect timing.
Any questions? Perfect. All right, thank you very much. On to the personnel. We have Mr. Kramer again. It's cold.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting the analysis for the Department of Budget and Management, Office of Personnel Services and Benefits. I'll discuss statewide salary actions, the vacancy crisis in state agencies, and various issues related to the state and health insurance account. The exhibit here on page 1 shows fiscal 21 through 23 spending. Nearly all of this funding in 22 and 23 will be transferred by budget amendments to state agencies for personnel actions. Very briefly, this is the program description for the agency. Normally I'd skip this, but I just wanted to highlight that OPSB is responsible for the oversight of the State Personnel Management System, or SPMS. That includes the executive branch, but with the exception of higher education and MDOT. Much of the data that I'll discuss later in this analysis, I'll make sure to make a distinction between SPMS or other state employees. Moving on to Exhibit 3. Exhibit 3 shows a breakdown of spending in the fiscal 2023 allowance. $590 million, or 85% of the fiscal 2023 allowance, is for statewide salary actions, with most of the rest for a supplemental contribution of $80 million to the health insurance account. Jumping to Exhibit 5. Exhibit 5 shows just the administrative costs within OPSB. 58% is for personnel, with another 20% for the subscription to Workday, which is the IT platform for state employee HR functions. Exhibit 6 shows all the changes between the fiscal 2022 working and fiscal 2023 allowance. I'll discuss all of these statewide actions later. But one item here I'll discuss is the Smart Work program, which is actually at the very top of the next page, on the top of page 11. The Smart Work program stopped accepting new participants in June of 2021 due to low participation. The fiscal 2022 working appropriation is nearly all restricted to other purposes, and there is no allowance for the program in fiscal 2023. Exhibit 7 shows participation and costs of the program. Total spending to date is less than $1 million, far below administration expectations. The allowance in the first year of the program included $8 million in general funds. DLS is asking DBM to comment on why it abandoned the program rather than making changes such as expanding eligible classes or easing other restrictions. In the personnel data section, OPSB has a 14% vacancy rate. That's more than 4 times its budgeted turnover rate. That's not uncommon across the state, which brings me to the first issue I'll discuss. There were more vacant positions in the executive branch of state government since at least 2008, likely ever. As you can see in Exhibit 8, there were nearly 8,700 vacancies in January in the executive branch, including higher education. The brief break in the trend that you see here was not due to filling positions, but rather due to the abolishment of several hundred unfilled public safety positions. Exhibit 9 shows vacancy rates by department every January since 2015. As you can see, the problem is widespread and not concentrated in public safety and health, as has been the case in the past. All agencies, with a few exceptions, have double-digit vacancy rates, and the average at the 6 largest departments is nearly 13%. In Exhibit 10, this exhibit shows that the problem is both widespread and persistent. Exhibit 10 shows long-term vacancies. Of the 5,245 vacancies in the SPMS in February, a quarter of them have been vacant for more than a year, and more than 200 positions have been vacant for 3 years or more. And so as the problem is widespread, there are definitely areas of deep concern. Exhibit 11 shows the 49 SPMS job classifications that have at least 25 authorized positions and a 20% vacancy rate. Many positions with the worst rates, like correctional officers and police communications operators, are in public safety. Many other high vacancy classes have direct public contact, like nurses, vocational rehabilitation specialists, and social workers. There are also many classes that cross departments, like IT, procurement, and fiscal services jobs. The result of all the vacant positions I've been talking about is fewer state employees performing the duties of state government. As seen in Exhibit 12, the number of people working in SPMS agencies and MDOT has declined by nearly 2,100 workers between 2019 and 2022. There are nearly 1,000 fewer workers in the executive branch, excluding higher education, than there were just 1 year ago. Exhibit 13 shows the share of vacancies in the SPMS by bargaining unit. Over the past 4 fiscal years, SLEOLA members, who are represented by the green share of the vacancies in this chart, have seen salary increases totaling 16%, as well as increments in 3 of the 4 years. That far exceeds the 9.5% in increases and 1 increment for other union members and non-represented employees in that time period. Since 2016, vacancies in AFSCME represented positions have grown by 33%, and among other union positions by 55%. SLEOLA vacancies grew by only 5% in that period, but are down 32% from their peak. However, SLEOLA only represents, as you can see here, a small proportion of the workforce. That lower level of salary efforts directed at the bargaining units that represent a much larger portion of the state employment force is not in line with the goal of improving overall recruitment and retention efforts. So all these vacancies have real impacts on the performance of state government. You either have heard or will hear about specific agency impacts in budget hearings for the agencies in this session. This list here on page 20 and 21 provides a summary. Common themes are high workloads, which reduce both retention and recruitment, backlogs in basic duties like assisted living unit inspections or property assessments, and delays in implementing criminal justice or education reforms. This problem is not isolated to Maryland. Exhibit 14 shows vacancy rates in other state governments where we could find data. As you can see, it's a fairly common issue. And not only is it not limited to Maryland, it's not limited to the public sector. Exhibit 15 shows job openings, hires, and separations since 2016. There are more than 10 million job openings nationwide in the last quarter of calendar 21, far more than the 6 million hires, meaning millions of jobs are going unfilled. A recent survey of public sector workers found that increased compensation was the best reason for employees to remain on the job. Likely with that in mind, the state has come to an agreement with all the unions for salary increases over the next 18 or so months. Most saw a 1 or 2% cost of living adjustment in January, as shown here in Exhibit 16, plus an increment or step, which averages about 2.4% increase, as well as one-time bonuses. Most will see 3% increases and an increment in July of this year and a 2% COLA in July of next year. As I noted earlier, Sliola's increases are significantly larger, a total of 17% in increases and 3 increments over the next 3 years. Exhibit 17 breaks down the cost of all these actions in the current budget. In addition to what I just discussed a moment ago, there's also funding for correctional officer bonuses and the annual salary review. The total cost across both fiscal 22 and 23 is $833 million, as shown here in Exhibit 17. While extensive, they're likely only keeping pace with other public sector jobs. Most county employees in the state either have or will receive similar size increases, and President Biden's budget proposal will include a 4.6% salary increase for federal employees. On page 26, many state agencies have taken to hiring employees well above base in order to attract candidates. It's not known how often this is happening, but DBM has given blanket approval to agencies to hire up to the midpoint for skilled and professional positions, and up to the 3rd quartile for management and special appointment positions. So it's pretty widespread. While the practice does improve recruitment, it creates a compression at the lower end of the salary scale and can harm retention by reducing morale if employees feel they aren't being properly compensated. The unions have agreed to pay equity provisions, which would provide raises to existing workers if someone is hired at a higher salary, but the provision is fairly limited. The issue illuminates the problem with the lack of increments or steps that have been provided to employees in recent years. Exhibit 18, the blue line here shows the average step of employees who are hired in a given year, and the red bar shows the size of the gap from the average employee compared to the average employee hired 5 years prior. People hired in the state over the last 10 years or so, on average, are only about 1 step ahead of employees who they have 5 years more experience than, but people hired in the 90s and 2000s are 3 or 4 steps ahead on average of people who were hired 5 years earlier. This pattern shows the lack of increments that have been provided recently and also suggests that base salaries are too low for the current labor market. DLS is recommending the adoption of budget language that would restrict funds pending a statewide salary review and a plan for a rebasing of the salary scale to address salary equity among existing employees and new hires. Finally, at the bottom of this page, while DBM has regularly awarded annual salary reviews, there's no systematic approach to performing them, and so DLS is recommending the adoption of budget language that would restrict funds pending a report that provides a process for regular systematic ASRs going forward. The second issue I'll discuss is the health insurance account. The fund closed with a $43.5 million balance in fiscal 2021, a nearly $100 million decrease. Exhibit 19 here shows the expenses and revenues to the fund. There's a $75 million federal fund and $80 million general fund deficiency appropriation in fiscal 2022, and as well as an $80 million contribution in fiscal 2023. These were required due to higher than expected medical and prescription costs in fiscal 21 and 22. They're also allowing employee monthly premium costs to increase at a slower rate than otherwise would have been necessary. Exhibit 19, as I said, shows the various expenditures and revenues. With those additional contributions I mentioned, the employee-employer split of costs in the plan is about 82% to 18%, meaning the state is assuming a larger share of costs than is agreed to with the unions, which the agreed to split is 80%, 20%. It's an issue you've probably heard a lot about recently is the transition of Medicare-eligible retirees to Medicare Part D for prescription coverage. A judge recently released an opinion in the Fitch versus Maryland case regarding that planned transition. The lawsuit divides the opinion divides the plaintiffs into 4 groups that are shown here. The opinion states that the first 2 groups, mostly retirees, have a right to prescription drug coverage according to the opinion, but the other 2 groups do not. The opinion also noted reasonable changes could be made to the coverage, but did not say what reasonable would mean in this case. No matter the decision, based on legislation, it's unlikely any changes could happen prior to January of 2024 at the earliest. And DLS is just asking DBM to comment on his plans for implementing the transition. The final issue I'll discuss is the implementation of a reverse auction platform for pharmacy benefits management. 2020 legislation requires DBM to use a reverse auction to procure a PBM, as well as a technology platform to evaluate the qualifications of prospective PBMs. The current contract with CVS expires at the end of this calendar year. The Budget Committee's asked for a report on implementation in last year's JCR. The report lays out an aggressive timeline to get the system implemented in time for the 2023 plan year, but the process is already behind schedule. So DLS is asking DBM to comment on plans for implementation. And finally, just to summarize, the first recommended action is regarding the rebasing of state salary scales. Second recommended action is regarding language regarding annual salary reviews. And recommendations 3 through 10 are all annual language asking for reporting on health insurance costs and other personnel issues. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Any questions? Great job. Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Greetings again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to be back again. For the record, I'm David Brinkley, the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management, and with me at the table is Deputy Secretary Mark Nicole. Should the need arise, I have Cindy Kolner, the Executive Director of the Office of Personnel Services and Benefits. There she is. And Christina Kaminsky, the Director of the Employee Benefits Division. There she is. And you all should know Laura Vikal from her previous exposure here as an analyst, and she's been very, very helpful in everything that we do. So she works in Cindy's shop too. So they're here to address any specific concerns that may come up through the course of our conversation. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today regarding the personnel budget analysis. I'm going to touch on a few specific items, but know that DBM concurs with all the recommendations set forth by Mr. Kramer's thorough analysis. Thank you, Jason, for the work that you invested in for your analysis. It was very thorough. I'm going to touch on 3 issues: the Smart Work program, transitioning to Medicare Part D, and the procurement of the reverse auction for employee and retiree prescription benefits. Additional details will be found in the DBM submitted testimony that you should have in your folder. So regarding DLS's inquiry into the Smart Work program, there seems to have been a general lack of interest from state employees regarding the program. Frankly, we were quite surprised that participation was much lower than we expected. It could have been because many employees do not have student loans to repay, or they may not be responsible for some of their children's loans. Negotiations, when we've gone through this, have been very tepid on this issue. So obviously it didn't become a large topic of conversations, even though we had lots of reach out on it. Second, I want to give a quick update in regards to the transitioning of the Medicare Part D plan. On December 30th, 2021, the court issued a ruling that both granted and denied, in part, the state's motion to dismiss. So the court's injunction remains in place for the time being. Fortunately, through Chapter DBM has been afforded an additional amount of time to implement the programs because of this ongoing litigation. It remains premature to discuss details of the implementation of the prescription drug reimbursement assistance programs because of this protracted litigation. Therefore, no changes will be able to be made to the program until January 1st, 2024, at the absolute soonest. Finally, regarding the reverse auction, as it pertains to the procurement of PBM contracts, our teams at the Office of Personnel Services and Benefits and DGS's Office of State Procurement have worked tirelessly to meet the start date of January 1st, 2023. However, during the evaluation stage, the prospective vendors' requests for proposal and live demo responses were either inadequate or incomplete, resulting in an inability for the procurement team to properly recommend a proposal to the BPW by the date that was originally specified. Nonetheless, the team expects, presuming the requirements of the procurement are satisfied, to deliver a recommendation no later than March 15th, 2 weeks from now. Additionally, as a consequence of that extended timeline, the department expects to be able to exercise the second 2-year renewal option of the current PBM contract starting January 1st, 2023. I understand that once a successful award is recommended to the BPW and the BPW adopts a contract, that 2-year extension can be terminated by the state, and the awardee of the reverse auction can then proceed. Again, we're presuming no delays, and that would even include such as an appeal. So I thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to be with you today, and my team is here to answer any questions, if any are there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Senator Roosevelt.
Oh, you go first, Phil. Sure. Okay. Big picture on our vacancies, we're not paying people enough, and we're not recruiting effectively enough. It's basically kind of the takeaway I get both from the analyst's report and from all observation. Do you basically agree with that, disagree with that?
I don't strongly disagree with it. I mean,
Okay.
we're in a challenging environment right now for hiring folks. But keep in mind, also, 40% of our budget, the state's budget, is given to local jurisdictions in many instances who compete with us for hiring those same people. And that's not a criticism, that's just the reality of where we're in. You'll also see on the analysis, I think it was, what page was that, Mark? 22. 22. Page 22, you'll see where we stand compared to other states. And we're, not far off the challenges that they're having. And even the analyst made a note that this is going on statewide, or nationwide, I'm sorry, nationwide. But there's a challenge there, yeah.
Well, let me drill down a little bit, as you would expect me to, on apprenticeship pathways. Several years ago, we have in budget language recommended that various agencies really look at apprenticeship pathways to deal with the recruitment issue. Instead of just trying to steal employees from other agencies, from the federal government or from county governments, is expand the pool of trained people. And it's my impression, with a few exceptions, not much of that has happened in state government. They've done it in the Natural Resources Police. They've done it a couple of places. But it hasn't gone in any cut to scale. And I know the Maryland Labor Department, which is working with lots of employers on creating apprenticeship pathways, is interested in trying to help. And I also know that the Kerwin law explicitly lays out a plan that by 2030, 45% of high school graduates should have completed the high school level of an apprenticeship. So I'm just wondering, what are the impediments to trying to move the state government agencies in a serious way to use apprenticeship pathways as a recruitment technique?
I suppose, and I'll see if my team wants to chime in on this, but when I think of the apprentice pathways also, they would be, might be for certain skilled positions that you have going on. We also have issues with professional roles that we have, analysts or people like that. We try to get interns in so they can get some exposure, but they're not necessarily, I haven't seen like an apprenticeship program for financial analysts or people along that regard. Now, When it comes to some of the maintenance programs and things like that, I, absolutely agree with you. But then again, we're competing then with the private sector, potentially where you have an individual who does excel, and then they make you've heard the governor say this before, where his son-in-law, as a HVAC professional, makes more than his daughter, who's an attorney, with some of the work that they have. So I don't disagree that certainly is a viable channel, depending upon the positions that we need to go after. Cindy, did you have anything you want to add to that, or comment along those lines?
Just, we have looked at apprenticeship programs. We are looking at it again. Can you hear me? Cindy Colner, just for the record.
Yeah.
One of the
Can we get that
primary-
mic on?
One of the primary
Thank you.
issues we've had with apprenticeship programs is it takes a substantial amount of investment by the supervisors when they bring somebody in and they train them. And in most cases, the supervisors, they want somebody to come in and kind of hit the ground running to do the work. So we've had a little bit of an internal barrier to setting up the apprenticeship programs, but we are circling back with our recruitment team and working with Dollar to try to pump some energy into the apprenticeship programs.
I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm totally sympathetic to your identifying the issue. We have a decades-long history of supervisors hiring people who are ready to go, but it hadn't worked. That's why we have these shortages. And so if there's anything that your department can do, the administration can do at the top level to move these agencies to really look at it a different way. You gotta grow your own. You gotta train your own people. It's gonna cost you some money, but it's cheaper than having to pay all this, extra pay recruiting people and all the other things and not providing services to people, which is bad enough. So I would encourage you, and if there's things we can do to help you, please let us know, because this is not a one-year issue. This is a next couple of decades issue. And we're not alone. I get that. There's no reason we shouldn't lead the nation in trying to solve this problem. So I appreciate your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Secretary and his team? Thank you very much again, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of people signed up to testify on this budget. Denise Gilmore and Patrick Moran.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm a field director with AFSCME Council 3. We represent 30,000 state and higher education employees here in Maryland. First off, we appreciate the very thorough analysis. We also appreciate the emphasis and attention that this committee has paid I know.
Maybe.
There we go. Okay. I've behaved so far. But we appreciate the attention to this high vacancy issue. One thing we really want to reiterate is what we are seeing in state government today isn't something that's just been created in a year. It's been the result of years of unnecessary hiring freezes, vacant pin reversions, recruitment efforts that just don't keep up with the amount of staff that are leaving, years of inadequate increments and COLAs, and as has been alluded to, salaries that are just quite frankly too uncompetitive for this moment. These staffing shortages impact our members, obviously. They're overwhelmed with their caseloads. They're working incredibly high numbers of overtime. They're missing soccer and football games with their children. They're burnt out. But as has been, alluded to so far, there's obviously a serious impact on the services that our members can provide to the state of Maryland as well. Much has been made about the backlog of autopsies at the medical examiner's office. In parole and probation, we have parole agents across the state who have caseloads of over 150 in some of our counties. We have child protective services workers who have caseloads that are double the recommended standards, and we're having to pull in child protective services workers from other jurisdictions just to fill the need in some places. We have a backup of CDL examinations at our MVA right now because we don't have enough driver's license examiners. These are all having a devastating impact, and we think that while it's certainly nice that there are finally some long overdue raises for our members in this budget, it took us more than a year to get into this. It's certainly going to take more than 1 year of long overdue raises to get us out of this as well. I want to respond just very quickly to a point that Senator Rosapet made on apprenticeships. One thing the state can do is expand its trainee and intern programs. So, for instance, within the direct care workforce, they have a direct care trainee position. That position starts without their certified nursing assistant, but they work for the state. They learn how to work within that facility, and then the state helps with their CNA certification. That's certainly something they can do. We do the same thing with postdoctoral students in psychology. But those pins, like all of our pins, are sitting vacant right now. So more needs to be done, certainly, to address that issue, and we're certainly eager to go into that. Finally, we would appreciate the committee's support in helping us study this long-term COVID issue as well. We've had hundreds of members who have fallen ill. Unfortunately, over a dozen have died from COVID-19. We are all, anxious to see what the long-term effects are going to be on the folks who have contracted COVID, and we're interested in seeing, the state take on a study to really look at this to make sure that we are providing the care that these employees deserve, since they've been frontline heroes during this pandemic. I'm going to hand it over now to AFSCME Council 3 President Patrick Moran, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the solutions we propose to get us out of this huge hole that we're in right now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As Denise said, my name is Patrick Moran. I'm the president of AFSCME Council 3, and now it's time for the bad behavior. I jest. While we are glad that our members are seeing real wage increases for the first time in 7 years, we think a larger commitment to solving this crisis is necessary. We would propose a number of solutions to address the historic staffing shortages in state government. First is funding annual step increases, as they do in the federal government, as they do in the county government, and as they do in city government. That is not a guarantee in the state of Maryland. When someone sits down and they are given the job description and what the salary scale is, they are told every year you are going to get these step increases, and in 5 years you'll make this, and in 10 years you'll make that. And in addition to that, there will be a cost of living allowance that is negotiated. Well, that is the furthest thing from the truth. We have seen at maximum 3 or 4 maybe, and I think I'm being generous, step increases over the last 8 years. Our members are woefully behind the rate of inflation, even with this recent wage increase. So that means that people that are serving the state of Maryland each and every day, as the years go on, have been cutting their own personal budgets because it is not kept up with inflation. And that's well documented. That's DLS's numbers, not ours. 2 is, although bonuses are a regressive form of compensation, DBM should consider retention bonuses for the entire state workforce this year to compete with private and federal sector employers who are offering higher pay and better working conditions. We've gone through with this with them at the bargaining table. We've discussed it, and we've been turned down, the vast majority of the times. Consider back steps for current staff. I mean, we have staff that are joining state service now, members, and they are pretty much making the same people that have been there for 10 or 13 years. That is how much they value the current staff that is committed to staying with the state over the years. One of our members who's been in the state service for almost 20 years is making slightly more, I think 1 or 2 steps more than someone that just started in their same agency doing the same job. Continuing COVID-19 response pay, which has ended earlier this month. Unfortunately, as Denise referenced, we've lost 12 members to COVID-19, that most of them work in congregate facilities, congregate care facilities such as the hospitals or the prisons or the juvenile service agency facilities, and they have no chance to socially distance. So, COVID is still a threat. COVID is still going on in these various facilities, and we think that's an appropriate response to that, to give them more incentive to stay. I'll look to move the pension vesting age back to, down to 5 years from 10. It's in a much better place than it was. And not only that, a lot of people are leaving between that 6th and that 10th year. When, if they're vested, they have more of an interest and incentive to stay and invest time and energy in the state. And now they don't, because they don't vest until the 10-year mark. And establish a commission that can study and make recommendations for the new administration on what the state can do to attract and retain more workers into state service. Unions as well as state colleges and universities should be all shareholders that are included in that process or that commission, but also some form of holding people accountable, the secretaries of the individual agencies. I mean, I think Denise mentioned that a number of the agencies are having a very tough time retaining people. I think DLS put that very succinctly. Department of Corrections, I think they've retained some, less than 100 people out of the new hires, or they've netted less than 100 new people over the last year. In the new hires. It is getting that bad. People are hitting their 20 years and they're out. And so we need something to hold the agencies accountable. The record surplus that was accumulated on the part of our members' backs over the last 7 to 8 years, and from the wise thinking of the Biden administration, the fact of the matter is we have this great surplus and it's not being put to use, it seems. And that's a shame, because the people of Maryland need the services. Our members want to do the job, but they're leaving in droves, and there's no one to backfill those positions. So more should be done to improve the service and support our state employees provide. And with that, I want to say thank you.
Any questions for this panel? Okay, well, thank you for coming in and sharing your
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
perspectives. Appreciate it very much. Yeah, okay, so we are